Very special thanks yet again to Affordable Prestige Cars in Glastonbury. As always, of course, I've linked to their website down in the video description. It's always a pleasure to work with them, as I did, of course, recently for the Mercedes R-Class review, and I'm going to be working with them again in future as well. But if you want to check out their current stock for these kind of machines, high-spec luxury cars for much more affordable prices than you might think, then of course check out their stock down below. With the majority of cars that I review on the channel, with the exception of my own of course, the general subtext of the review is always hopefully, if at all possible, to help that car to sell at the particular dealership that I drove it at. On this occasion, I'm actually going to ask you not to buy this car. And the reason why is because I want to. And that tells you pretty much everything you need to know, because within 10 or 15 minutes of driving it, I knew that I wanted this car. And if not this one, another XFR. Because for a while I've wondered what should my next car be, what would I like my next car to be. Of course there are different prices out there, and I've considered some wildly different options, from ML63s to Bentley Continental GTs to BMW 6 Series. I now know what my next car should be, an XFR. Hopefully this XFR, because I absolutely adore this car. But now of course you want to know why, because not only do I love this car, but I also made a pretty hefty claim in the thumbnail of this video. See, in the super saloon world, especially the 2000s and even some of the earlier 2010s, there is a particular icon that gets almost all of the attention. And it is of course the V10 engined BMW E60 M5. It has a notorious gearbox but an incredible engine, fantastic performance. It is something of a modern unicorn and kind of a cult icon. However, there are a number of things about the M5 which, spoiler alert, I'm not a huge fan of. For instance, the interior. I find it straight up boring. Even the design of the car itself is very understated, and even though of course that makes it a good sleeper, to me, there are certain cars that you kind of don't really want to be a sleeper. You want it to show off just a little bit. And to me that is just one of the things that this Jag does better than that BMW. Now I believe that the XFR loses a lot of attention because of two vehicles in particular. One is of course the M5, which as I said tends to get most of that attention. The other one is Mercedes AMGs. Something like a CLS 55 or an E63, they're great cars. I mean, for sure, I love the CLS, but this Jaguar often gets completely overlooked, sometimes even forgotten. It's easy to think, well, it's just a big supercharged Jag. Is it really going to be that special? Surely Jags kind of feel similar, maybe across the board, just a two-door or four-door version of the same thing. Well, trust me, they really don't, because this car is fantastic, and it was one of two different Jags, both of which I loved, that I drove on the same day. The other was an XK from the 2000s, the later 2000s in particular, and that review is dropping on the channel in a couple of days' time. But even between those two cars, with relatively few years between them, there's a total difference. To me, the difference between something like the XK and this XFR is kind of old money versus new. To me, the XK is a James Bond kind of car. It's elegant, it's classy, it's old school, it's what you'd think of a Jaguar as being. To me, the XFR is John Wick. It's new money, it's brutish, it's savage, it's still well dressed, but it has a high body count. To me, that is just more badass. And everything about this car ticks all of the boxes that I love. Now, one of the only things that I'm not a huge fan of in terms of my current car, the Touareg V10, is that it doesn't sound that great. And of course that's partially because it's a diesel. Diesels very rarely sound good. That's not a problem with this Jag. Another issue that I sometimes have with non-diesel performance cars though, is that because I do a lot of miles, well, they drink a lot. There's no two ways of saying it. Well, actually this Jag is a lot better than you'd think, and I mean a lot. It's got a 5-litre supercharged V8, 503 horsepower, which is technically more than an M5. It has a whole lot more torque than the BMW as well, 460 pound-feet, which is AMG Mercedes territory, but with a much smaller engine, so in other words, at least as impressive. It has a gorgeous gearbox. I love the gearbox in this car, I love the operation of it. It has a little twist knob which rises up out of the dash when you turn on the engine. It's just got this kind of simple, clean class to it, and I love that. But to jump back to the point of fuel economy, around town of course it does drop, but on the highway, this car can actually achieve 32 miles per gallon. That is actually pretty phenomenal for a car that is not really designed with any thought to fuel economy, but it goes way beyond that. There are some sedans, which I've been in the past, which are surprisingly cramped, despite being large, and I don't just mean ones that I've reviewed, I mean just cars that friends and family have owned as well. They've kind of disappointed me in that way, in fact. This Jag, on the other hand, is great. In fact, I didn't even have to adjust the seat. The headroom is infinite. The rear passenger space is of course great because it's a four-door rather than a coupe. The trunk space is at least as good as any sedan would hope to be, and it is kind of unfortunate that for this first generation they didn't make a wagon, because that would be an incredible wagon. But be that as it may, even if there was a wagon, this might be one of the few occasions where I would stick to the four-door. Now in terms of performance, of course it's fast. It weighs just under 1900 kilos, which in other words is about 100 kilos lighter than my Maserati Quattroporte was, which is a pretty healthy difference, especially when it's got 100 horsepower more and a whole lot more torque. The performance is great. 4.7 seconds to 60. Unfortunately, it goes down the German route of having a limiter to 155. I've never understood that, but of course, you could get it removed if you wanted to. And I have no doubt that if you do, it probably has a similar top speed to said BMW, which is around or probably even over 200 miles an hour. Of course, you're not going to be doing 32 miles to the gallon at that point, but still, it's nice to know that you've essentially got a supercar that is in a sedan body, and that's one of the other reasons why I love it so much. Now, speaking to that supercar influence, I already likened it to the car equivalent of John Wick. Another thing, something which of course will make more sense to general petrol heads, which I would describe this as being similar to, is actually the Aston Martin Vanquish, which I reviewed not that long ago on the channel. In fact, possibly the best way to describe why I love this car so much is because to me, quite literally, this XFR feels like a four-door Vanquish. And I mean that in all of the best ways. I don't mean that in terms of having like a controversial gearbox or something. I mean it has all of that muscle and sheer presence on the road. This thing dominates the road, but at the same time, it doesn't feel anywhere near as large as it technically is. It's so nimble and light on its feet. Even in terms of maneuverability at lower speeds through cramped roads, it's great. You would have no trouble with this Jag in a city centre or a car park. It's perfect for daily driving. And in terms of the interior, which of course is always something that's very important to me, one of my biggest gripes with a lot of high-performance sedans is the interiors are just so boring. They always seem to go down this route of making them look like an office, and I've never understood that. I mean, I get a lot of guys who own those cars, or a lot of girls who own those cars probably have an office job, but why would you want to drive something that feels like an office just to go to the office to work? Surely you'd want something that's got a little bit more flair and more fun to it, and to me this Jag has a gorgeous interior. It's got, in this particular spec, a two-tone leather, darker and cream on the bottom, with a suede roof, possibly Alcantara, I'm not sure, hand-stitched dashboard, I believe either aluminium or stainless steel switchgear, which looks great. The darker wood looks fantastic. It holds up really well. It's a 2011 car, but it doesn't look it. I mean, that's 9 years old. The car could be brand new and you'd still believe it. And it's also one of those occasions where I would really stress that photos, and to be honest, even footage, as good as, GoPro HD footage can be, it does not do this car justice, especially on the interior. You have to actually see this car and drive it and sit in it in person to fully appreciate why I love it so much. And of course you could always say that about a car, but to me this really is one of those occasions. There are very, very few times when I've seen a car, even fewer times when I've driven a car, where I would describe the vehicle as, subjectively of course, perfect. a car which, for me at least, I would not change a single thing about. Another example of that was the late 90s Mercedes E55 AMG, which I reviewed earlier on the channel. This Jaguar is another occasion. I would not change a single thing about this car, and the amount of car that you get for the money is unbelievable. This car is £13,000, and that's not an unusual price. There are plenty on the market for similar prices. This one is in fantastic condition inside and out, and it's clearly been loved. And to me, that much car for that much money is insane. A 500 horsepower, supercharged, rear-wheel drive, proper authentic Jag for what a few years ago would have been hot hatch money is crazy. And to essentially round off my thoughts about the XFR in an abstract sense, I think another thing that I love about this car, to reference once again the Mercedes CLS, and also in a kind of similar way the Porsche Cayenne from the earlier 2000s, to me this car feels for Jaguar what those cars felt like for those brands, and to some degree the Stinger for Kia as well. The vehicle almost represents a pivot point for the brand, where everything can be gauged as before and after that vehicle. To me, this is that car for Jaguar. Not just the R, but even the XF in general. Everything before this is a traditional, quintessential Jag. What you think of from that old school Jaguar era, from the XK8s to the Sovereigns, all that kind of stuff. To me, after the XF, and really starting with it, is new school Jag. And it paved the way for what they do and are continuing to do now, with the F-Type, the I-Pace, etc. And I'm very happy to say that, at least in my opinion, not only is this a hugely important car for Jag in that sense, where it kind of heralded in this new era, as the Stinger did for Kia, the CLS did for Mercedes, and the Cayenne did for Porsche, but it also represents, I would say, the best use of new money aesthetics. The car doesn't have a traditional feel. That sounds like a bad thing for a Jag. You'd kind of think you'd want it to. But once you drive it, I think you'll get what I mean. It feels like new school British muscle. Everything you would want and hope that a British performance car would be. Authentic, quality, but also brutish and aggressive. It sounds fantastic, as you could hear at the start of the video. I also love the fact that at 30 to 40 miles an hour, it sounds at least as good at full chat. You don't need to put your foot down for it to sound great. It rumbles all the time. It really does feel like a modern muscle car, and I love it for that. If it wasn't clear already, I absolutely love this XFR, and even though the XK was great in its own way, and of course I'll get to that in a couple of days on the channel, this one completely took the cake for me. As far as the year so far, this is my favourite car that I've driven this year, and it probably will be for at least a while longer. I absolutely love this car. As I said, I actually hope to get one now, and that is not something which I expected to say before driving one. And to me that is a crucial thing, because the XFR, as I've been mentioning numerous times through the video, is very easy to miss. It's easy to underestimate this car and think it's just another Jag. It really isn't. This is at least as legitimate an option as an M5 or an E63 or a CLS 55 et al, but in my opinion better than many of those options, because it has the English class, a far nicer looking interior which holds up to time very well. It has elements of timeless design to it, and just an absolute brute of an engine which somehow, and I do not know how they managed it, somehow gets 32 miles per gallon on the highway, which is incredible. But overall, that's it for my thoughts. If you are an XFR owner, maybe used to own one, tell me your thoughts down below. Of course, if you're new to the channel, be sure to not only subscribe but hit the bell, otherwise you won't be notified of my newer videos. And of course, check out my other reviews as well, such as for the E55, the Vanquish, and more. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.